For my paper, I looked at the link between violent video games and people committing violent acts. I mostly looked at mass shootings where a lot of people were killed and injured, like Columbine. And my theory throughout was that video games and violent media in general doesn't really affect how people act, and that the reason people commit violent acts and things of that nature is a deeper reason. My thesis was that video games do not increase aggression within youths and adolescents, and that blaming video games is a distraction from the real problems at hand. Like I said, I focused a lot on shootings, and the Columbine shooting was probably the best one as an example for people blaming violent acts on video games. After Columbine happened, there was a lot of critics like Jack Thompson who blamed the students' use of video games like Doom, which is a first-person shooter made in the 90s that allowed a person to go through and kill monsters and stuff like that. They blame Doom and their vast interest in the game for maybe not causing the attacks, but changing the individual so that violence was a better answer. Outside of just Doom, they blame media in general. There are three core people that they blamed. One was that the kids read a book by Stephen King under an alias that was called, I believe, Rage, and the book was about a kid going into a school and shooting his classmates. But the book wasn't pro that. They made the kid seem deranged and problematic, and that King made it that the shooting was a terrible thing. But the media just said the book was about a kid harming individuals in this school, and that encouraged them to do the act. Another person that was blamed was Marilyn Manson, who, if you're not familiar with him, he's a goth shock rocker that dresses weird and believes in kind of satanic, or maybe not believes, but uses a lot of satanic themes and ideology in his music. A lot of people, the shooters were purportedly fans of Marilyn Manson, and some people said that they actually, while they were committing the act, they were running through the halls yelling that Marilyn Manson rocked or something. But there were conflicting reports that Manson was really not the. They were not really fans of Manson, that they actually didn't like him. They thought he was bad. I forgot what the quote was. Up on the screen right now, there's actually some quotes from people. Some were a few years after the shooting, but they're all people blaming video games or the effect video games had on them to the crime. All these are, except for maybe Jack Thompson, all these are actually people that work within the environment of psychology. David Grossman is a psychologist, and Gerald Block is I believe he's a psychologist too, and a researcher in psychology. But you can see how people, even respected people within the field of psychology, were blaming video games, despite there not being really any evidence that video games do cause violent acts. Probably Block said the two shooters relied on the virtual world of computers and games to express their rage and spent time in cutting them off from it in 1998 sent them into a crisis. So he's blaming that the withdrawal from video games actually caused this, which is kind of like contrary to his other points that he makes, where at other times he blames the virtual world warping them to warping their reactions to the environment and changing how they reacted to stuff. But in this he says it's actually, his point is almost like he's saying that it's cathartic and that it helps, was helping the two shooters. A lot of these critics ignored some basic points as well. Claybold and Harris had a lot of problems. They both suffer, or at least Claybold was believed to suffer from depression. They both had problems with anger, and Harris, the FBI called Harris a psychotic. They both were bullied heavily, and they both were kind of isolated from the main group of society. They only had a small group of friends that they were very close to, but otherwise they spent most of the time with each other, and they didn't really get out and know the general population, which might have harmed their perceptions. Columbine wasn't the only school shooting where people blame video games, or shooting in general. Virginia Tech, people blamed Cho, and they thought, it was originally thought that he was a user of video games, but that was disproven not too long after those claims were made, and he in fact never really ever used video games. The Norway shooting that happened about, I believe it was last year, it was last summer. He actually people claim that he actually used Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 to train before he committed his act of violence. So you can see that those were three major, probably the three biggest major violent acts that happened in recent years, and all of them at some point had people blaming video games for their cause. And it kind of made me wonder why video games are so appealing. First, video games are the easy answer. So instead of doing deep, taking a deep look at the people, acting or asking what was wrong with them, what they were doing wrong, how their environment was, what their family was like, what their school was like, you just say they were playing violent video games. The video games obviously warped them, and this all could prevent it if they weren't playing Call of Duty or Doom or whatever they were playing. Video games are also, every year video games get more and more violent. They get more and more realistic as well, which might increase how people perceive them as violent. I mean, 20 or 30 years ago, it was a fraction of what, realism in games were a fraction of what they are now. So I guess if you can argue that the more realistic games are, the more easily you can be convinced that they are violent, that you can be convinced that people can blur reality and fiction. Video games offer simulation, which this allows people to actually, instead of just on television you're watching someone hurt other people, you're actually doing it yourself. But in video games, it's an active experience where you go around and you can harm individuals and end lives and be the actual person that are committing these things, and you make the active decision to harm. In television, someone else, the character in the television show, makes the decision, but in a video game, you're the one calling the shots, and you're the one that ultimately decides to shoot the gun or slash the weapon or do whatever you need to do. One of the main people that blame video games for causing violent acts is Jack Thompson. Thompson is a lawyer, and in recent years he's mostly been a talking head on news shows. Thompson accuses video games of being simulators for real life, and at one time he made a comparison between Army flight simulators and video games, and he said that with flight simulators you are training people to fly a plane. In video games you're teaching people to kill and harm and mutilate. But I think the key difference between these two things is that in video games, in both flight simulators and video games, you're not changing a person's mental capabilities, you're just allowing them to act on their choices. In this quote, he's talking about how GTA, how GTA is especially Grand Theft Auto video game, which if you haven't played it, it's the basic plot is you're a criminal going around harming, harming people, committing crimes, and basic bad things. In this, he's saying that the game causes people to be more aggressive and more sexually aggressive because it combines sex and violence. Which again, he's making the same point he made with the flight simulator, is he's saying that video games have the capability of altering the way a person thinks, which I will hopefully show that it's not true. Like Jack Thompson, the FBI released a profile that seemed to blame video games for, or violent media in general, for causing shootings. They said that a shooter is prone to, without any real evidence, they said a shooter is prone to high amounts of violent media consumption. But the problem with the report is they weren't specific at all. They didn't specify what constitutes high amounts of violence, or what constitutes violence at all. I mean, there's obviously a difference between playing a game or watching a movie intended for kids that has violent aspects to it, and then playing a game like Call of Duty that has higher amounts and more realistic examples of violence. They also didn't constitute what constitutes excessive amounts of violence. Someone that plays a game 5 hours a week, that's a lot of time to play for some people that's a lot of time to play a video game, but for others, some people might spend like maybe 20 hours a week or more playing video games, which there's obviously a difference, and the FBI didn't really clarify what's the threshold for excessive.